Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. This is Books Are the Basis initiative from the ISKCON Ministry of Education, trying to help devotees, inspire devotees to read more often in Srila Prabhupada's books. And today, our special guest is His Grace Kurma Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. My humble obeisances to all the listeners.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for joining us.
Pleasure.
You know, Kurma Prabhu, of course, he's well known as the Hare Krishna cook, we can say. But also Prabhu is a wonderful speaker and an author also. So we are very looking forward to talking to you. Kurma Prabhu was born originally in England, then moved with his parents early to Australia, lived in Australia, and came in contact with the devotees in 1970. So he was like one of the pioneer devotees in the Australian Yatra, and soon became a well-known cook, served as the head chef at Melbourne's vegetarian restaurant for many years. And of course, he's author of several very well-known Hare Krishna vegetarian cookbooks. We all know and love them. And Prabhu also hosted 3 international television cooking series where he taught cooking on television. And he has traveled and taught cooking around the world. And I think we all very much indebted to his expertise and knowledge that he shared on cooking. And since 2014, Prabhu lives again in Ireland. And at the moment, if I'm right, you're working on another cooking book about big quantity recipes for large kitchens. So, yeah, I know you're in a marathon. So thank you for taking the time to talking to us about the importance of reading Prabhupada's books.
My pleasure to be here today, Krishna Prema Rupa Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. First time I've seen you since Zurich.
Yes, Kurma Prabhu came also to Zurich, Switzerland. We had a lot of cooking classes. It was very exciting.
It was a good, exciting adventure.
Yeah. So let's start with, we'd like to hear how you came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books, since we were talking about books. I mean, of course, you can also tell in general your story, how you joined, but with a focus on what book did you read and how did the books change your life and inspired you in Krishna consciousness?
Yes, well, the story begins in 1970, as you mentioned. And my first encounter with Srila Prabhupada's literature books, actually, it was a Back to Godhead magazine. My 2 earliest encounters, the first one was a Back to Godhead magazine, which I found in an abandoned house. I was going to a youth club that I was just starting to visit. And by the time I got it together to visit one day, the club that I was about to join had moved premises because I was a little recalcitrant when it came to socializing. So by the time I got it together, there was nobody there in the house. It was abandoned, and all there was an empty room, except that in the middle of the room, there was a number 36 edition of Back to Godhead magazine, mint condition, just lying on the floor with no human contact whatsoever. And it was like this Back to Godhead magazine had decided to meet me. It was astonishing. And then I took it home and I read it. And there were pictures of devotees chanting in the Boston Commons and on Sankirtan in New York, black and white pictures. And I was immediately attracted. And on the back cover, which I very naughtily cut off the Back to Godhead magazine, on the inside cover, there was a picture of Radha Landaneshwara. And there was a verse from the Brahma Samhita. Now, at this time, I was a schoolboy. So I was very attracted to this page on the back inside cover, especially very attracted to the Brahma Samhita prayer, Venum Kvanantamaravinda Dalayatakszam, etc. I stuck it up on my wall where I was studying for my last 2 years of high school. And that picture and that verse accompanied me through as I came in contact gradually with the devotees. My first encounter with one of Prabhupada's actual books was A Nectar of Devotion. By this time, I'd started visiting the temple in Paddington in Sydney. Srila Prabhupada had not yet visited Australia. This was before his first visit, which was in 1971. But this was the end of 1970. I was visiting the temple by now with a school friend of mine, Mark, who later on became initiated as Mahaprabhu at that first initiations, and Vaibhavi Devi Dasi, wife of Charu Prabhu from Charu, Utah. That's his Facebook identity, but you probably all know Charu. He was the first Australian temple president, although he's not Australian. He had come with his wife, and they were just regular tourists when they first met the devotees. Anyway, by the time I came to the temple, Vaibhavi was there, and she wasn't even Vaibhavi yet. She was still Bhakti Christine, but she sold me A Nectar of Devotion, which was my first book. I took it home and I read it cover to cover, although I didn't really understand it very well, especially the last chapters about the various different types of ecstasies. It went over my head, but I read it. And then she gave me a Macmillan edition of Bhagavad-Gita, the little blue ones, the first ones, the abridged Bhagavad-Gita with the blue cover. They were my first two books. I've still got that Gita, by the way.
Wow. Do you remember something specifically, what you read or touched your heart of Prabhupada's teaching?
No, nothing. I can't remember anything. I know that the purification started to take place. Mm-hmm. All I knew at that stage was I had to become a devotee. I wanted to become a devotee. My parents said no, and I said, yes, I'm going to be a devotee. So the books did their job. And so it was the books and then the association of the devotees. It was like waking up and meeting old friends. It was like meeting old friends. And it was like, basically, I was starting off again from where I left off in a previous life. That's how it felt even at the time, even though I couldn't put it into words. But later on, when I started to realize what was going on, then I realized that's what was happening. And the books was certainly the springboard. Mm. But I wasn't very philosophically inclined, and so therefore I didn't get into anything really detailed at that point.
Mm. Actually, what I forgot to mention, you're also the author of the book, the Great Transcendental Adventure, which is like describing Srila Prabhupada's pastimes.
Yes, this one.
Pastimes in Australia and New Zealand.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a nice book, and I feel like that was Prabhupada inspired me to write that, because Prabhupada wanted at every temple have an historian. There should be a resident historian in every temple who should write the history of that temple, write the history of when the deities were installed, and all sorts of details. So I'm glad I found that out after I wrote the book, but that confirmed that I was on the right track.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So yes, anyway, the initial contact, I went to the temple, and then my life of studying Srila Prabhupada's books started. At the temple, we used to read 5 books a day. This was in 1971. There was no Bhagavatam class. There was no Srimad Bhagavatam class in those days. Srimad Bhagavatam class started in 1972 in the world. So in Sydney, anyway, we used to read 5 books a day. We used to, I think, 2 in the morning and 3 in the evening, or the other way around. We used to read for 15, 20 minutes from each book: Bhagavad-Gita, Nectar of Devotion, Teachings of the Lord Chaitanya, Krishna book, and I've missed one, Srimad Bhagavatam. And no one gave a class. It wasn't, we didn't know anything about giving class. We just used to read. And that certainly had its effect.
Wow, but that's beautiful to hear that there was this culture of just coming together and read Prabhupada's books.
Yeah. That's right. And no one had the initiative or had the knowledge to know that you could actually give a class. No one felt confident or knew that that's what you do. All we knew was we read it. So one person would read it out loud, and then we'd pass the book around, and everyone would get a chance to read. So that's how classes began, before the formal Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-Gita classes.
And of course, later on, you became, as we mentioned, a well-known cook. Do you see any connection between cooking and reading Prabhupada's books? I mean, that's just a spontaneous question, but in sense of, did the reading of Prabhupada's books kind of inspiring your devotional service in regard to cooking as well?
I hadn't thought about that connection until you just mentioned it then, but I suppose the necessary purification that comes from studying Prabhupada's books keeps you on track, because the kitchen is a very passionate place. And as you know, it's things, happen, and you've got to have a firm foundation of sadhana to be able to stick it out in the kitchen every day. And I mean, I'm still cooking every day. I'm still cooking twice a day, every day, for our deity worship at home. So it's the same, really. Same things going on. We've got our deities at home. With reading of Prabhupada's books and deity worship and general Krishna consciousness, they're definitely connected. Without a proper sadhana, then things start to go wrong. You start to have accidents in the kitchen. You get distracted. You don't cook properly. So there's, everything comes from proper sadhana.
That reminds me of the story. I think it's given there in the Prabhupada Nectar, where Srila Prabhupada tasted your puris.
Yeah, he did have my puris. Yeah, the story was a little bit mangled, but the basic truth from the story is that he did eat my puris and he did like them. And he asked Shruti Kirti, who was Prabhupada's servant at the time, he said, because Shruti Kirti makes wonderful chapatis, and he always has. He said that he's made tens of thousands of chapatis over the years, and he's perfect at making chapatis, but apparently his puris weren't as good. And so Prabhupada asked Shruti Kirti, after he ate those puris that night, from the 9 o'clock, the late night Mahaprasadam plate, which he was offered, which I had cooked, he told Shruti Kirti, Prabhupada said, who has cooked? And Vegavan said, Kurma cooked. I was doing the arati at the time and putting the deities to rest, and I didn't get to speak to Prabhupada personally, although the story says that I did. But anyway, Shruti Kirti asked me the next day, he said, Prabhupada really liked those puris, and he asked me to ask you if you can show me how to make them. And I was sort of embarrassed and humbled. And I said, well, yeah, I just make them. I don't know. I never really knew about how I got the recipe, but they seemed to work, and they all puffed up, and they stayed puffed up, sort of like me. And so yeah, I got to cook them for Prabhupada, and I got to cook them again when he left Australia for his next flight, and he took them with him on the plane. That was the only cooking that I did. But it doesn't matter what I speak about, I always get asked questions about cooking, and all somehow or other. It doesn't. I can't escape.
Right. All right. So thank you for that introduction. So why do you feel it's important, just in general, why should devotees read Prabhupada's books, especially on a regular basis?
Very important question. And I was thinking about, I'll answer in a personal way. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, reading Prabhupada's books keeps me out of Maya. It keeps me out of Maya, and we all want to stay out of Maya. And, I've been in a bit of Maya over the years. Over the last 50 years, I can say that I've had periods where I've been, a bit in Maya. But I mean, I've always been a devotee, but, you have your days and your weeks and your months where, you think, boy, that I could be doing a lot better than this. Reading, the happiest times of my devotional life are when I'm reading regularly. And on the opposite side of the coin, the times where I've been in the most Maya, that's the times when I haven't been reading regularly. So there's a direct correlation between staying out of Maya and reading Prabhupada's books. And we all want to stay out of Maya. So that's in a nutshell. Regularly reading, for instance, Srimad Bhagavatam is auspicious. Nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. By regularly, Prabhupada says, nityam, he says, can mean always. It can mean 24 hours a day. Or Prabhupada said it also can mean every day. We may not be able to read 24 hours a day, but we can certainly read every day. So, or attend classes or personal reading, the same thing applies. Anything inauspicious from the heart is immediately removed. And by regularly reading, regularly your heart becomes cleansed, as we know. And I think the important word in that verse is irrevocable. It becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Irrevocable means it can't be exchanged. It can't be revoked. So any advancement that you make, neha bikramanasosti, etc., from the Bhagavad-Gita, any advancement is not lost. So the advancement that you make from reading Prabhupada's books, it adds up. It's in your account. Prabhupada said that Krishna has an account for us. It's in our book. Prabhupada actually says the word book. It's in our book, and Krishna looks up how many times you've read his books and how many Bhagavatam classes you've been to, and everything that you've done, he takes it very seriously. And anything inauspicious that you've done, he doesn't take it very seriously. He just looks at his bhavagrahi. He just looks at the good things that you've done. So if you've gone to a lot of classes and studied seriously, then eventually your heart will become purified gradually.
I like that connection you made with like being fixed and being a little bit like away from Krishna consciousness in connection with reading, because it shows how the reading really helps us to make this connection and kind of establish ourselves more and more.
Right.
Yeah. Now, in the Shastric study, when we study books systematically, we talk about those different aims of study, and one is the famous Shastra Chakshu, to see the world through the eyes of scriptures. And in these interviews, we have also spoken with many devotees about this. What would be your, realizations on starting to see the world through the eyes of Prabhupada's books?
Right. Well, I mean, every day I have things that come up, and I probably can't remember everything. My short-term memory is not as good as it used to be. My long-term memory is better. But, things come up. For instance, just the other day, in fact, 2 days ago, just when I read the questions that you originally sent me, and I saw this question, just that very morning, I've been thinking about that same subject. This is in the realm of how the Srimad Bhagavatam is alive and Prabhupada is alive in his books. I happened to notice that the evening before last, or the evening before that, there was a news article about how America has the abortion laws in America are being overturned in an astonishing way. And that next morning, because we're at the moment studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, my wife and myself, in our morning classes, and this is chapter 16 of the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I think it's verse 15. We were reading that very morning, and the purport was all about this business of abortion, and it was completely, in a nutshell, everything that I would have used to counter any propaganda from anyone who would have been suggesting that abortion is okay. And the whole purport was about abortion. And because the subject matter of that chapter is King Chitraketu and his son, and how his son had been poisoned by the recalcitrant queens, the murderous queens, Quittajuti's co-wives, and apparently there was quite a few of them. They contrived, is that the word I'm thinking of, to assassinate the boy, and they did. And then Prabhupada, of course, mentions in this purport how, because Narada Muni brought the boy back to life in order to preach to the king and the queen, his dead son had come back to preach to him. And Prabhupada mentions in there about how killing children has existed since time immemorial. The only difference is that things like abortion, and especially in the large quantities that it is undertaken in these days, has become very, very common. So I saw this and I read this verse and I thought about what I've been thinking about the other day, and I thought, this is amazing. I'm able to see, to be reminded of course, we know that abortion is sinful, but to be reminded in the very purport that we're studying the morning after that I was thinking about this. And once again, because these things happen all the time, it's astonishing. And the second example that comes to mind about Shastra Chakshus is that my son passed away in 2017, Nitai, at the age of 20 or 19. And so reading this whole chapter about the movements of the living entities and how this little boy was brought back to preach to his parents, it sort of was a poignant reminder about the temporary nature of relationships. That's the whole point of that chapter of the Bhagavatam, how we think this is my son, this is my father, and then, you know, he comes back after being invited by Narada Muni to, and the parents were, you know, astonished. And Narada Muni says, your parents are here. And he says, which parents are they? I've had so many parents. And astonishingly powerful and poignant to be read by anyone who's lost a child. So once again, this really hit me, you know, and it was, it's once again, Prabhupada's books are alive.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing this very personal example. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can all relate to that. I mean, any devotee who is practicing that, you know, that aliveness of these books. And as you said, you have, you know, something going on in your life, and then you come to the Bhagavatam class and here it's there, or you open a book.
There it is. And sometimes, you know, you have a question. You're thinking, I don't have an answer for this question. And then that very day or that very evening, you know, there's the answer in the purport that you just opened. And it may not even be a scheduled class. You may have just opened any book at any page and there's the answer. It's happened, you know, on too many occasions for it to be something coincidental. Isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and another question I wanted to ask you is about Prabhupada's presence in his books. Prabhupada made that statement that he will live forever in his books. Now, you as a disciple, you have met Prabhupada personally, and of course now for many years have been in separation to Prabhupada's Vapu. How do you experience this, reading Prabhupada's books and experiencing his presence through the books? Would you like to share some realization on that?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, you know, even though Prabhupada's been physically gone for so many decades, I really don't feel like he's gone. It's like he's present, completely present in his sort of eternal form that he was with us in those 12 years that we were with him. I don't feel that he's gone. And that is sort of supported by the fact that, you know, because I read Prabhupada's books every day and I listen to his lectures and morning walks, room conversations, read his printed words and etc. It's just like an eternal sort of presence. And yeah, it's a very special sort of thing. And not only that, I was thinking just this morning when I just quickly reviewed these points that we're going to be talking about, I was thinking that for myself as a disciple of Srila Prabhupada and other disciples of Srila Prabhupada who are, you know, all in their, you know, 70s, some like Mukunda Maharaj just had his 80th birthday. We're all sort of in that exit room. We're all sort of we're heading towards the departure lounge. But for those young boys and girls, or not so young boys and girls who didn't get a chance to take, you know, personal initiation from Prabhupada, they also are in a position where they don't have to lament that they actually didn't get to see Prabhupada or be with Prabhupada, because they can also be with Prabhupada every day if they read Prabhupada's books. So really, we're all in the same situation. The fact is that Prabhupada didn't leave, and he is present in sound, and that is an eternal situation.
Mm-hmm. I like how you mention that you read, you listen, like really absorbing oneself in Prabhupada's Vani. And of course, as you mentioned, there is now many ways we can do that by video.
Many ways. Yes, I was going to elaborate on that a little bit later. Yes.
Yeah. The importance to also hear his voice and his lectures. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about that also.
Yes.
Now, we are stressing here the importance of reading. That's what we do in these interviews. We try to encourage devotees to read more often. And obviously this has a reason, because it seems that there is many devotees who do not read so regularly. How would you think would ISKCON be different if devotees actually would take up to reading more often? You think
it would be very different. I go to Facebook every now and again, or actually every day, to keep on in touch with all my godbrothers and to see the way of the world in ISKCON. And the downside of that is, of course, you have to see and hear the thoughts and words of devotees who appear not to be reading Prabhupada's books. Of course, there's many who are, but there's many who aren't. And how would ISKCON be better? Well, this reminds me of a story that I put in my Great Transcendental Adventure book in the 80s, or should I say the 90s, when I was interviewing Prabhupada's disciples. I traveled the world to find all the devotees that were here in Australia when Prabhupada was here. By the time the 90s came, a lot of them had moved to different places. So I was tracking down Upendra. He was one of the key players, of course. He was one of the key players in bringing Krishna consciousness to Australia and opening up the whole Krishna consciousness movement to, thousands of people. I mean, he's eternally blessed because Prabhupada sent him here. He didn't want to go, and Prabhupada said, "No, you should go." And he said he cried all that night when Prabhupada told him to go. It was very overwhelming for him to go to Australia, the other side of the planet, but he went. He got a lot of blessings from Prabhupada, and he sat down in the park along with Bali Madan and chanted Hare Krishna in the similar ways that Prabhupada did. So yes, Upendra was an interesting character, and one of his habits was that he liked to gossip. He had many good qualities. He was a wonderful cook. He was very enthusiastic. He sang beautifully. He dressed impeccably. He was very enthusiastic about Harinam. Like we were all a mixture of different qualities, and one of his bad qualities, Upendra, was that he liked to chitter chatter. He liked to chat and chitter chatter and gossip and talk prajalpa. And so anyway, when I was interviewing Upendra in one of our interviews, I think this was in San Francisco, when I caught up with him and he was there. He'd been gone from Krishna consciousness for quite a while at that stage. As many devotees did, they have a bit of a history of leaving Krishna consciousness for sometimes 10 or 20 or 30 years, some of Prabhupada's early disciples. He'd been gone for a while, but he was lamenting about his tendency to gossip. And he told me this story when he was cooking for Srila Prabhupada. There was a little room behind Prabhupada's room in the Melbourne temple, the original Melbourne temple, a tiny little kitchen. Chitralekha, his wife, used to go in there and cook the milk sweets and for the deities. And then when she'd finished, he would go in and cook Prabhupada's lunch. And it was adjoining Prabhupada's room. There was just a tiny window, or big window actually, between the two rooms. But Prabhupada tended to sometimes leave it open to get some fresh air through. So Upendra was cooking, and according to his normal habit, he started to chat to some devotees who were wandering into the kitchen. And while he was cooking, they wandered in, and he was saying, "Hey, did you hear this? What about so-and-so?" The normal gossip. And very soon descended into a mundane gossip session all the while he was cooking for Prabhupada. Anyway, all of a sudden Prabhupada called out, Upendra, come in here. So Upendra, he could tell from the tone of Prabhupada's voice that Prabhupada was not happy. And he said, what were you doing? He said, Srila Prabhupada, I was talking with the devotees. Prabhupada said, gossip? And Upendra said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Upendra was always mortified by Prabhupada's chastisement. Some devotees never got chastised by Prabhupada, like Shruti Kirti mentions that Prabhupada never chastised him, hardly, actually never. He says, I think the reason for this is because I would have completely gone to pieces. He said, but some other cooks and secretaries and servants, Prabhupada would sometimes be blistering in his chastisement. So that was Upendra's relationship. He got chastised a lot. So he said, yes, I was gossiping Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, gossip, he said, this will destroy our movement. He said, gossip will destroy this movement. And he said it twice. And then Upendra went downstairs and told the story to Chitralekha, and she said he was almost crying. He was so distraught, as he normally was. He was very emotional. And when I interviewed, when I interviewed Chitralekha, she confirmed that that's what happened. I like to get both sides, a couple of sides of the story. So that was an incident which I put in my book, and I thought it was it encapsulated everything about Gramya Katha, the tendency to gossip and to talk nonsense. And Prabhupada said, it will destroy this movement. It's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. And as we see, it has, and continues to cause havoc. And if we read Prabhupada's books every day and we absorb ourselves in Krishna consciousness, then the tendency to gossip will be less. I know that in my own life. The more I read and the more I hear, the less I'm inclined to talk mundane katha. There's a direct correlation.
That's a very interesting, point you made, because whatever we, get into our mind, that is also what comes out again.
Exactly right.
If devotees actually absorb daily in Prabhupada's transcendental sound vibration in the Bhagavatam and so on, then when they come together, then naturally they also, tend to talk about what they read and
That's right.
But if you don't have that input, then you talk about something else.
That's right. There's nothing to talk about. The first thing that comes into your mind is the news and what you saw on Facebook and this and that nonsense. Yeah, very, very, very true.
Yeah. So in that sense, reading is also kind of a nourishment. Like we have nourishment through the mouth, which we spoke about cooking, and but also that a reading is also a nourishment. Yes,
all sorts of ingestion of Hari Katha, Krishna Katha, Prabhupada Katha, any of these things are equally powerful.
I was just thinking when you mentioned how you were traveled around the world and trying to finding these devotees to interview them about the story, and that also must have been quite an interesting phase in your life, like very much absorbed into Prabhupada Katha, and would like to share something about this time?
Well, this was the happiest 5 years of my life, I would say. I spent 5 years interviewing devotees, traveling, 150, 130, I can't remember the number of interviews, different devotees I interviewed, about 900 hours of interview. And it was a very uplifting experience, finding my godbrothers and godsisters all over the world in the jungles of Jakarta and in the plains of Utah and in France and Germany and Italy and everywhere and England and throughout Europe and everywhere where my godbrothers and sisters had relocated themselves. I tracked them down. There was a lot of research to find them and then to book air tickets and to plan an itinerary and then spend the day with them and interview them. And I learned I learned from the devotees that compiled the Lilamrita, that did the interviews to help Satsvarup Maharaj do his interviews, some of Satsvarup Maharaj's disciples. I learned from them how to interview devotees, how to get the most information out of them. And he gave one of them, I can't remember his name. He's still Satsvarup Maharaj's secretary. Gave me some books to read about the art of the craft of interviewing was one of the books. Fascinating. So I thought I better take advantage and make sure I get as much information as I can, because, at least 20 of those devotees have passed away since I interviewed them. And of course, we're all, as I said, we're all got our boarding passes and we're just waiting for the call. So in the future, there'll be none. And everything that has been compiled will be just in the form of sound and in the form of words. But those devotees will have returned back to Godhead.
I just ask also because we're talking about reading Srila Prabhupada's books and how it's important. But then also, and we have spoken with other devotees about this topic, that it's almost equally important to read about Srila Prabhupada, like to understand the author better, and then we also become more enthusiastic to actually read his teachings.
Exactly. In fact, one devotee, this was written in one of Siddhanta Prabhu's books, which is just transcriptions of his actual interviews with these wonderful devotees. And one lady, one devotee, I don't know if it was a lady devotee or it was a lady guest, but anyway, someone recalled that there was a lecture and somebody asked, I think it was in the early days, they said, Srila Prabhupada, we know that Krishna says that if you think of him at the time of death, you will be able to return back to Godhead. What about if we think of you at the time of death? And Prabhupada closed his eyes as if he was listening to maybe Krishna speaking to him. And then he opened his eyes and he said, it is the same. If you think of me or think of Krishna. So that is really, it's a very powerful thing. Because, as I was going to speak about a little later on in our talk about the importance of hearing about Srila Prabhupada, it's equally powerful.
Yeah. All right, so we spoke a bit about the importance of reading, and we can also maybe go to the next step and talk about reading practice. How to, or maybe we can start with this question: how do you ensure to have enough time for reading Prabhupada's books? Because we're all busy, and then that's often an excuse also for often also ISKCON leaders, who, of course, should be an example, but then they're so busy and not finding time, or congregational members who have a work and family. So how do you, would be your advice to find time for reading?
Well, I feel a certain urgency now. I'm getting older, and I think I went through different phases. Everyone goes through different phases in their life. Times when they're really dark years and dark months, or I was speaking to a godbrother of mine today. He just wrote me a letter, and he wants to come back to Krishna consciousness and get heavily into sadhana, and his expertise is gardening and growing crops. He was asking me where he can recommend a farm where he can go and spend his last days, because he's 75 years old. He said, I wasted 40 years of my life. I just went away, and I've come back, and I feel like I've just wasted 40 years. They've just vanished, where he stopped chanting and he stopped reading. So I hear these stories, and I think, well, it's not too late to revive, even for those who have gone through difficult times. It's never too late. And I was reading, but it is an impetus. It's an impetus. You're thinking, well, it's not, when you're a young devotee, you think, oh, okay, I'm only 30, I've got 50 years left, I can sort of coast along. But then when you hear, this devotee's passed away, this godbrother's passed away, this devotee's got cancer, this Mataji's just died, and we're all 70, 75. And then it becomes a little bit more urgent. And I was reading a verse the other day in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I'll read you the translation. This is the famous verse Men become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains, but the devotees who simply eat ordinary grains but do not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna gradually become weak and fall down from the transcendental position. However, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his body and mind begin to bloom, and he begins to laugh, sing, and dance. That's a famous verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 25:278. And the purport, the very telling purport, which everyone knows, or they should know if they read, all the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all of the books that have been translated, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad-Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus, they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal blissful life of transcendental pleasure. So, yeah, how do I ensure enough time to read Prabhupada's books? Okay, I know I should be reading Prabhupada's books every day. Well, what I've found, and just to segue back to what I was saying, I've gone through some difficult years in the past where I stopped reading regularly, but I remember some of my most nectarine years as a younger devotee. The most happy years for me were the years when I was studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I had notebooks and I was writing notes and I was learning verses. They're the years that I look back and think they were just wonderful. And then the years when I sort of like stopped reading, they were dark and cold, and I don't wish to go back there and think about them. So these days, what I do is I just think, okay, I've got to read, I must read, but not only that, I enjoy it more than ever. First of all, you have to do it regularly to get a taste for it. And if you have to struggle, it's very difficult. But if once you revive that taste, it becomes very pleasant. My wife and I study Prabhupada's books every day in the form of a combined study and class session in the morning and in the evenings. And we've set at the time 7:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. And no matter what we're doing, we arrange for that 7:30 time a.m. and p.m. to be available. Sometimes it may be a bit later for some reason, but or a bit earlier in the evening. But 7:30, it's time for Srimad Bhagavatam class, and we read the verse, and I speak, and my wife discusses, and we talk about the verse, and we make it a regular daily function, morning class and evening class. So and we stay away during that time, turn off the internet, turn off the computer, go away from the computer, whatever it takes. We're reading in a different room than the computer, and we just have in our little cottage ashram here, we have our morning and evening classes, and that way. And also in the evening, we another aspect of study is as well as reading. The way we study Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, is the normal chant and response method, as we do in the temple. Our house is like a little temple. But in the evening, we before we read the Gita, we chant one chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. I know Vaisheshika Prabhu encourages all his followers to do the same. Study a chapter, chant a chapter of Bhagavad-Gita every day. Now, of course, this is an instruction that's coming directly from Prabhupada in the 7th canto, in his the instructions of Prahlad Maharaj. There's one famous verse, of course, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. There's a verse there with a huge purport. It's 16-page purport, I think it is. And Prabhupada talks about this subject in great detail. And he mentions somewhere in that chapter that to counteract offenses in deity worship, one should chant one chapter of Bhagavad-Gita daily. So this is also an impetus for me, because I'm worshipping deities here at home, Shalagram Shila, and I always feel that my standard of worship is rubbish. And so I think, not that I'm going to continue serving in a rubbish way and just chant a Gita chapter to absolve myself of my sins, but to, I always try to do better. But in order that if I've actually, there's mantras you can chant, mantra hinam, kriya hinam, Bhakti Hinam Janardanam. There's 8 verses you chant after you do deity worship in order to beg for forgiveness. But another way to do it is to also chant a chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. So at the moment we're on the 18th chapter, and it's a long chapter. So we've split it into 2, and we chant the Sanskrit and the English. I chant the Sanskrit, and then my wife chants the English, and then next night it's reversed. And then we go back and we study one verse and purport of that chapter, and we go through it in order. So we're almost at the end of the Gita, and then we're going to start again. So in that way, it sort of adds a bit of flavor and a bit of excitement, and it also means that, at the end of 2 years, we would have read the whole Gita, and we would have chanted 700 chapters of Bhagavad-Gita, or we would have chanted one chapter 700 times, and we would have read the whole Gita, if my maths is correct. So in that way, it's a sort of an enticement to regulate. And because the mind tends to, if you don't keep the mind in check, the mind will give you all sorts of reasons why you don't need to read, and it's the rascal mind. So you have to beat it with a broom handle or a shoe. I think the morning is the shoe and the evening is the broom handle. Either way, it's the mind really needs a bit of heaviness.
What I hear from you is that priority, like really make it a priority.
Yes, even if you had other things. I mean, I've got so many things going on, but you have to stop. When it's time to class, you have to stop. And you don't just say, I'm too busy. You have to say, okay, that's the backbone of our day. And my wife said, actually, she's the other day, dear Lolita said to me that it's the best time of the day for me, the morning class. Yeah. We're sitting there and the sun's streaming in and the birds are tweeting and the trees and there, and it's a very nice time of the day. There's not always, sometimes it's dark and cold, middle of winter. And then we've got the Srimad Bhagavatam there, the literary incarnation of God, and it's a wonderful feeling. It's like being in the temple, even though we're just at home.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, like, having such a regulation, this is really like temple life. And in some way,
yeah.
In some way, that's what ashram means. The Grihastha ashram. It's you're also taking shelter in the Lord, and you're practicing Krishna consciousness.
That's right.
It's very inspiring to hear that you have such a regulated reading practice. It's amazing.
And I also get to read, in the evenings to sit down and actually physically read. And half of the time I'm reading Prabhupada's books, and half the time I'm reading books about Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you know that there are 192 books in print about Srila Prabhupada?
190.
192.
Wow.
Now, I heard this. I think it's 192. I'm going down, scrolling down here. Yep, 192.
Okay.
And I thought, because I was, someone wrote me a letter on Facebook and said, Prabhu, did you know that there's 192 books that are in print? And I said, how did you get that number? He said, I wrote the list. I forget the name of the devotee, very, very intelligent devotee. He's got a list of all the books about Srila Prabhupada in print.
Wow.
And I said, can you send me that list? And he sent me the list, and there it is, 192. They're numbered. And, that includes multi-volumes, like Hari Stories, 5 volumes, and et cetera, et cetera. And he added all together, and it comes to 192 books. So I was thinking, wow. So, I spent half of my time reading Prabhupada's books, and the other half of the time reading books about Prabhupada, because I feel it's the same. Mm-hmm. And, I dream about Prabhupada, I think about Prabhupada. It's like, and some devotees, when they relate stories about Prabhupada, it's like Prabhupada's there. Some devotees that Siddhanta Prabhu interviewed, some of them are just, they have such incredible memories, and they can recall every nuance of Prabhupada's gestures and what he was, where they were walking, and it's like they're blessed with good memories. And so you're there with Prabhupada on a morning walk, or you're there in the room with Prabhupada, and it's wonderful. So yeah, there's really no excuse. There's more books than there's no book. There's more books than you could possibly read in one lifetime. At the moment, I'm reading. We're reading the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam about Chitraketu. Just remarkable. I mean, I think you were going to ask me that question, but I'll let you ask me.
What is your favorite book
What is my favorite, and what am I reading at the moment? My favorite book is the book that whatever book I'm reading at the moment, that becomes my favorite. I mean, I'm reading Srimad Bhagavatam and I'm thinking, oh, I said to my wife the other day, this is the best chapter. We were reading of Vritrasura, the story of Vritrasura. I mean, that is such a powerful story. Some of the other Puranas actually mention the story of Vritrasura as being one of the most notable narrations of the Bhagavatam. Vritrasura, because we're going back now to find out how Vritrasura got himself such a body, and of course before he was Chitraketu in a previous life. And tomorrow we're starting the chapter where Mother Parvati curses Chitraketu. Lord Shiva, he just smiles, and it's sort of like he knows that it's just a bit of jesting going on, but Mother Parvati takes it very seriously when Chitraketu, suggested that it was a bit strange that they were embracing in an assembly in front of all these great sages. And Lord Shiva just smiled, but Chitraketu got very angry and she cursed him. But anyway, the chapter of Vritrasura's preaching to Lord Indra is just remarkable. And it was like Krishna preaching to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in many ways. There was parallels. But we were reading that chapter and we were thinking, wow, this is going to get any better than this. But then it does. Then the next chapter you read, you think, wow, more nectar. And even just the story of Chitraketu and his meeting with Lord Ananta, and remarkable. And at the same time, as we read the Bhagavatam in the morning, we're reading Burijan Prabhu's study guide, which is another important way of studying. Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the questions. How do you study? Well, we also have these study guides to help us understand what we're reading, and the commentaries by the acharyas, and it just makes it a more rich experience. So at the moment we're reading, as I said, Bhagavatam in the morning and Bhagavad-Gita at night, and all sorts of other books that we've read for private reading. I read the Brihad Bhagavatam Rita, and reading the Krishna book in the evenings, and next is going to be Chaitanya Charitamrita. And plus I read the Memories series, the books about Srila Prabhupada. There's 5 of them, and I think I must have read them 5 or 6 times each. I went through this marathon period where it was a non-stop Prabhupada marathon, and it was just wonderful. So I've taken a break from that, and I'm just reading Krishna book. But whatever I'm reading at the time, that's my favorite book.
How can we get such a taste, Prabhu? Obviously, you got the taste in reading, and some devotees may feel these different obstacles in reading, and one of them is maybe a lack of taste. And what would you advise devotees to get to that level where you really want to read and relish Prabhupada's books so much?
Well, I think we have to really, really practice a little austerities and cut back on Facebook and Twitter and all those things, which completely eat away at our enthusiasm to hear and chant. And also, as I said, just get into the habit, and also remember that death can come anytime. Because when you get older, you realize that this could be the last day that I'm reading Srimad Bhagavatam. So let's make it a good one. There's many ways of doing it, but we just have to do it.
Becoming more aware about
more aware of Janma, Mrityu, Jara, and Vyadi, and we're in that last. We're in the last section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you already touched on it. Any tips or advice to study books or to improve our reading practice?
Yeah, well, I remember the happiest time of my book studying life began in 1976. 1976 was the time when we got a new GBC in Australia. Madhuvisa had left. He had gone back to New York to be temple president, and then he'd left Krishna consciousness for some time. And they installed Bali Madan as the GBC, but that didn't work out. So then they sent Guru Kripa Swami to be the GBC. You know, Guru Kripa Swami, controversial, the mean Swami, as he was called at that time. Of course, he's not so mean anymore. But one of the amazing things working under Guru Kripa Swami is that he was mad about learning shlokas. He was what we call the shloka shlinger. He slung a lot of slokas. You know, he got us to memorize whole chapters of Bhagavad-Gita.
Wow.
I remember I learned chapters 7, 8, 9, and half of chapter 10. I could just recite them. I can't do it exactly anymore, but it had an immense effect on me. So I learned about 450 slokas, and some of those slokas I can easily recall to this day. You know, something sticks even though, you know, you get old. When you can, if you're young and enthusiastic and your brain's nice and fresh, or you're older but you're blessed with a good memory, learn verses, learn shlokas. This is a great way of keeping on your toes. I can't learn anymore because I'm an old dog, and you can't teach old dogs new tricks, but I've got a whole storehouse of verses there. It's like a storehouse of gems. And I remember the story of Gajendra when he was attacked by the crocodile. He remembered verses that he had learnt, Prabhupada said, in his previous life as Maharaj Indradyumna, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And he recalls verses that he learned in a previous life. So if by chance, you know, we don't go back home, back to Godhead, and we have to take another life, perhaps we'll remember some of those verses that we learned this life. And yeah, I could hazard to say that sometimes I remember when I was learning verses, some verses were very, very easy to learn, and I was able to learn the Sanskrit English in a blink of an eye. And I thought once, well, maybe I learned that sloka in a previous life, and maybe I'm just brushing up on it now. But anyway, learning verses, and I've got a whole collection of sloka books, young devotees from the 70s and 80s. There was a whole lot of different shloka books, and plus I wrote my own shloka book, and my own personal sort of book of verses, handwritten, which I've still got. So, you know, shloka books, and that's a good way of studying Prabhupada's books. What was the question?
I think just in regard to shloka books, or shloka, or learning shlokas in general, I think it's also related to Shastra Chakshu in the sense of that when you learn all these shlokas, in some way, this wisdom becomes very much part of you. It's not yes. Only there in a book, but even you don't have a book, the wisdom is still with you because you remember the shloka. And then in a certain life situation, you more easier remember a shloka which kind of relates to the life situation, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. And if you listen to Prabhupada's lectures a lot, because another way that I bolster my studying is that I've got two iPods, for huge big ones that have 45 gigabytes in each or something, because they've stopped making them now. But I've got them, and I keep them very, very carefully. And I got two of them full up with Krishna Katha. There's some other nonsense on there too, which I don't listen to anymore. But I have them playing all day on endless loop in the lounge, and while I'm cooking, while I'm doing the puja, and sometimes if it's a bit of a disturbance, if my wife wants to just have a bit of silence, then I put it in my pocket and I take it in the kitchen and put earphones on. So I'm listening to Krishna Katha probably 6 or 8 hours a day, and just generally while I'm doing other things, because I'm cooking a lot and doing deity worship. So, you know, between cooking and deity worship, probably 4 or 5 hours. And there's always something playing. Prabhupada's lectures, Prabhupada's morning walks. And there's not only Prabhupada's lectures and morning walks, but there's audio books. Now, this is another huge topic. But, you know, Amala Bhakta's recordings, and then Keshava Bharati Maharaj has just released his full Chaitanya Charitamrita recitation, not the Bengali, but the translations and the purports are huge. I don't know, 36 hours or something, or 136 hours. And plus the Brihad, he did the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and you've got Dravida's recitations of the recitation of Bhagavad-Gita, you know, full verses and purports. So there's all sorts of things you can play, and whenever you feel like, you know, a change of pace, you can listen to devotees recalling Prabhupada. But that's another way of because we've got to do other things. Some devotees drive a lot. I don't drive, but if you're in the car a lot, you just put on some, you know, it's very easy to listen to the radio and stuff. I don't know what devotees do, but those who are serious, they won't be listening to the radio. They'll be listening to Prabhupada's, you know, Krishna Katha, Prabhupada Katha, audiobooks. I mean, it's a huge, and there's many other audiobooks. And there's also there's lectures by Prabhupada's disciples, and the ones that really inspire you. That's also an inspirational way of packing in the Krishna Katha, you know, in all different ways. So it's just unlimited. So
not wasting time, really being conscious about how precious time is. Something that Prabhupada also emphasized a lot, not wasting time.
That's right. And it's one of the items of surrender, is it not? Avyata kalatvam, the concern that time should not be wasted. Virakti anyatra kalatvam. Anyway, there's that verse by Rupa Goswami. Avyata kalatvam. The conviction that I must not waste any time.
Yeah, one of the symptoms of bhava that one is reading.
Symptoms of bhava, that's what it is. Yeah. One of the verses that I learned, which I'm very happy for, because I can just recite those verses. Yeah. And the funny thing is that I can remember the Sanskrit more than the English. I don't know why, but I can remember the Sanskrit, and then I can explain what it means, but I can't remember the exact wording of the meaning, but I know what it means. So so it becomes like when you've learned these verses and they pop back into your head, and you feel so happy that they're still with you, you know.
Yeah. Wonderful. I feel it's very inspiring to hear from a devotee like you to being so much absorbed in this Shravanam Kirtanam. At the end of the day, it's all about Shravanam Kirtan. That's the main process, and it's wonderful to see how you're absorbed in that. Maybe towards the end now, we could just talk about how to contemplate or apply also these knowledge. I mean, Prabhupada gave us such a treasure of wisdom, and we absorb so much information and knowledge. Any advice from your side, or some realization on how to apply all this knowledge in our daily life?
Yeah, good question. Well, if you've crammed all this information in, a lot of it's going to stick, and a lot of it will naturally come to the foreground of your mind when you're confronted with news of the day or circumstances. And if you've been absorbed in hearing, then naturally you'll be chanting. So you'll be able to recall these things. And even if it just means bringing them up in a morning class or an evening class, or just in a conversation, looking at the sorry state of the world and seeing things through Prabhupada's eyes. And, and the amazing thing, reading a purport by Srila Prabhupada that was written 50 years ago, and to see how it is even more applicable now than it appeared to be 50 years ago. It's like these books are eternal; they're ever fresh. Prabhupada was talking about war and about the state of the world and how and what will happen in the future, and it's all mentioned there in Prabhupada's books 50 years ahead of time. And so if we just absorb ourselves in hearing and chanting, naturally these things will come to the forefront and we'll know how to proceed. We'll naturally know how to, especially if you repeat them, if you give class, if you share this information. Of course, if you repeat what you've heard, it becomes solid. And how to apply it? Well, it naturally, it seems to happen as a natural course.
Like just by the absorption itself, purification takes place, the consciousness changes, and we see the world differently, and naturally we start to apply step by step. Right.
That's right. And especially when I read about Prabhupada, I can. That's the most practical. I mean, sometimes, like the other day, we were reading a purport, and it was all about it was all about pradhana and the what's the other word I was looking for? Some of the more complex aspects of our philosophy, the Mahatattva and the Pradhana, and this comes, and then that's that usually goes right over my head. I'm not very scientific, so I find that tough going. But then when you hear, of course, there's many purports which are completely practical, but then when you hear Prabhupada's morning walks and lectures and room conversations and advice to his disciples, I mean, that is instantly applicable. Instantly applicable. I mean, I was reading the other day. Jananivas was recalling he was in a room with Srila Prabhupada, and someone was talking about. Someone came into the room and they said, "Srila Prabhupada, we have a Govardhan Shila." Srila Prabhupada, no, it was Jananivas himself. And what should we do with our Govardhan Shila? This was in the early days of the movement. Prabhupada said, you should take him back to Govardhan Hill. And Jananivas comments in that interview with Siddhanta that Prabhupada was not in favor of us. That it appears very clearly to him that he was not in favor. But he said, Shalagram Shila, no problem. When you're ready, but he was not that enthusiastic about Govardhan Shilas, and so that I started to realize that sometimes things creep into ISKCON that are not exactly what Prabhupada wanted it to be, and priorities have changed over the years, and today's ISKCON is not the way ISKCON was 50 years ago, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But some things, the way things were done then was how Prabhupada wanted them to be done, the way kirtans should be performed and the way deity worship is performed and what we should cook and how we should cook the Sunday feast and what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. And some of those things have gone completely out the window. But when you hear 50 years ago, a room conversation or recollections with the devotees had with Prabhupada, and you hear it, it's like, wow, that really it puts everything in perspective. Everything in perspective. And then you realize some things have completely gone off the track. Some things have just slightly deviated. And some things are just a little bit misunderstood. And some things are completely as they were before. But you have to have the discrimination to know how to apply them and what to do about. I mean, if you're a manager, it can be very disturbing to see disturbing trends in the way that our society is moving. And if you're not a manager like myself, I just look at and I observe from my little cottage in the woods. And, but if someone asks me, I'll tell them frankly. Yeah. So, how to apply this information, it takes a little bit of intelligence, actually. To know how to apply things that you've learned and experience, intelligence and experience.
Yeah, it's a very relevant point, as you also mentioned previously, that most of you and your god brothers and sisters are, mid-70s, and soon the generation of Prabhupada disciples will not be on the planet anymore. So then, how to make sure that ISKCON is moving in the right direction? Certainly, taking shelter in Prabhupada's books will be one of the most essential, ways to do so.
The most essential.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, as we said, you know, Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's lectures, Prabhupada's morning walk conversations, Prabhupada's everything that, you know, hearing Srila Prabhupada's voice and what he has to say. It's the same as reading Prabhupada's purport, because Prabhupada dictated those purports and then they were typed up. So it's really that the purports are just the written version of Prabhupada's voice, and Prabhupada's voice is the voice version of Prabhupada's books. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kurma Prabhu. It was a great pleasure and honor to talk to you.
It's a great pleasure to talk to you, and I apologize for going on and on and on.
No,
we've probably gone way over time, but thank you for letting me speak.
It's great to hear all your realizations.
Thank you.
Do you have any last message or something you want to share before we close?
I don't. I think I'm spent.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank
all
you.
glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.